Hello and welcome to the Son of a Blitch podcast. I'm your host, George Blitch. I'm joined today with a good friend of mine, Matthew Mitchell from Matthew Mitchell Architecture. How you doing today, Matthew?
Hello, man. Nice to be here. Thank you for the invite and looking forward to getting this going.
All right. So I figured the first thing I need to kind of do is let people know some of the things I have planned with the podcast. My goal is to just find a bunch of interesting folks that are doing interesting things and to share their platform, their message, whatever it may be. You and I have been talking about this kind of for a little while, and so finally decided let's hit the ground running. I have a series of about 5 different people that I have plans to interview here soon. There's a list of about 15 more that I've reached out to, but there's 5 that are confirmed so far, so I'm really excited to kind of take that next step in and get some content going.
It's really cool getting to know you over the years. I think there is a web of different avenues that you can take this podcast down. It can be anything and everything. I mean, you have connections to the Northeast and college and playing soccer. You have the Native American experiences working, with the folks in that particular industry. And I know you'll take a dive into that. Your music career, the ranches, I mean, just everything across Texas. So it'll be really interesting to see where this can go and how many avenues you can get down.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited to jump into all that. As you know, I have a tendency to get involved in a lot of different projects from all sorts of different walks of life. And, there's little segments of my life where I've spent, doing something like with my work with Harvey Arden. He's a former National Geographic staff writer, editor, and a best-selling author as well. Most of his kind of work that he's well known for deals with Native American Indians, indigenous elders worldwide. He spent a lot of time working with some Aboriginals, and he took me under his wing, and I spent about 20 years working with him. And in that kind of world with indigenous folks, there's sometimes a tendency for certain folks to really not to guard themselves, their culture, and from outsiders. When you have someone like Harvey Arden, who had done decades of work with everyone, he really was like the gatekeeper, right? He was the person that they were like, oh, you're with Harvey? Okay. And they would open up to me. And, I was just thinking about it the other day. I was writing together a list of some of the people that I've met, some of the Native American leaders and, elders or just people who were involved in the American Indian movement. And, I was looking through pictures, and I went to go spend time at Dennis Banks' his house when he had this canoe race with it's called the Yamamoto Cup, and we were there for the first one in the early 2000s. And staying the night at the home of the founder of the American Indian movement, and then right next to him is Clyde Bellecourt, who unfortunately recently passed. Dennis passed a little while before, but there's other guys that they worked with, Russell Means and, Wallace Black Elk, and these people that I've had the amazing honor of like sitting, across from them at a table and just talking with them. And sometimes when the company I used to work with, we would be recording them, and we'd have interviews. And so we'd have video and audio recordings, and I was in charge of that for this company that I worked with Harvey before we kind of did our own publishing company. But that, now I look back and I'm like, man, I really wish I hit record a lot more. Sure. But some of those conversations that I had with them were, that's for me. And like, it's recorded in my mind, and, I'm excited to share some of those stories. But it's such a wild experience to have those. So I'm definitely excited to talk about that time in my life.
I think it's interesting too that that subject right there has other threads too that can take you into other, like where this podcast will go in terms of like the music thing, and like thinking about Rage Against the Machine, right? A band like that, and what they were trying to bring to the forefront of mainstream culture about the injustices that many people have suffered. And just some of your music and just meeting various people and that avenue. It's really interesting how you have this, it's a web, because it's like all these things kind of connect in some way, but they definitely have opposite ends of a web, So, I look forward to hearing about where the music went as well, and like where, like interviewing various folks that you've met over the years in the music industry and what they sing about and what they talk about.
Sure. And those influences, I think, played a part, in some of the songs that I wrote, or some of the lyrics I put together when I was with, Dead PA, and traveling with that band there. And, touching back on Rage Against the Machine, like that's where two worlds collide. There's this, I remember seeing them at a Lollapalooza when they opened up like the entire showcase, and they were playing on stage, and sorry, a little sub rant here, but I was right up next to the stage, but off to the side a little bit, so I could like see the stage through the chain link fence there, and I was just kind of mesmerized, and hearing these amazing songs, and those folks who know Rage Against the Machine early days, they had some amazing tunes, and they were quite the live act.
Very powerful music.
Big time. And, like they spoke to all those things too, the injustices, the struggles, all the, very, very important stuff that you hear in their music that they're talking about. And so I'm just kind of taking it all in, and I'm sitting next to this guy on the other side of the fence, and we both are watching as a security guard comes, and they're trying to tell this guy who's filming that he can't film. And so the guy, instead of like adhering to that request, jumps on top of the van that he's got all his recording stuff and equipment in, and he starts filming from the side of the stage. Well, I guess he didn't have the proper permission or whatever to do that. So they start dragging him off, and like literally pulling his leg off, and like dragging him off this van and taking his recording equipment. And I'm sitting there next to this guy, and he's like, I can't believe that. I'm like, I know, right? This is like absolutely nuts. Like, it was just such a surreal experience to see this. And so we start chatting about just music and just everything in general, just this total normal guy. And at the end of our conversation, after about 10 minutes of talking, he's like, hey man, I got to get going. And Rage Against the Machine is wrapping up their set. And the guy's, all right, see you later. And kind of walks off. And then 20 minutes later, here's Tool stepping on stage, and I look up, and I was like, "Oh, the lead singer. That's the guy I was just chatting with."
You're talking to Maynard.
I'm talking to Maynard, and years later on, I got to spend some time with him when he did they were doing like a meet and greet for his vineyard, and they had some wines there that they were brought out to a local store over here, and you could kind of line up. Everyone's trying to, get autographs for, Tool paraphernalia. And I, just wanted to say, hey, we met a long time ago. And he's like, I remember that day. That was insane. And then we just kind of started chit-chatting about everything. And, then I talked to him about the work we were doing with Leonard Peltier, kind of bringing it back to the Rage Against the Machine song, Freedom. If you ever seen that video, their official video there, it's kind of a snapshot of clips and of the incident at Oglala, which is a documentary that Robert Redford produced, and about Leonard Peltier and a shootout that occurred on June 26, 1975 at the Pine Ridge Reservation. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit more, but it really kind of gives you a real quick, 5-8 minute intro into Leonard Peltier. Well, I'm doing this work with Leonard Peltier, and then I'm like, oh yeah, of course, one of my favorite bands is they're producing a video that's raising awareness about that, and then there's a ton of other musicians who have done songs by, for, and about Leonard, but this kind of like, it was like my musical web, overlapped with the Native American stuff, and then working with Leonard Peltier, because Harvey, he actually he was the editor of Leonard Peltier's first book, Prison Writings, which, I know you have a copy of there. And it was kind of his writings from within prison. There's mixed with poetry. It's a wonderful book. And Harvey spent, I think, like 2 years shopping that book to various publishers. They went through 35 rejections before someone finally picked it up and ran with it. And then when they did that, all of a sudden, all the press and everything that they had planned for it just dropped off. They didn't really want to promote the book. And when it came time for Harvey to want to put together a follow-up book, he's like, let's do a book, have you thought of Leonard Peltier lately? And we can, have some interviews with Leonard, have him write some, I'll write some, we can talk to different, people, maybe have some of Leonard's artwork in there. And, we were like, okay, great. So, what you're the, best-selling author. What do we do here as far as kind of reaching out to publishers? And he's like, I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to do it ourselves. We'll do it the way we want to do it. Have no one tell us no. Let's just put it out ourselves. And he's like, I think you're the right guy for it. And I was like, okay. So, I'm like taking all these crash course things and, publishing and, different grant writing and just kind of trying to understand that side of business. And, I just dove deep into it. And we spent two years working on that book. And, it was the first of many books that we did together. And one of our goals with that publishing company, Have You Thought Publishing, because at the time we were looking for a name, and we had one book under our Have You Thought of Leonard Peltier. So we'll do HaveYouThought.com. And, we've stuck with it now as HYT Publishing. And we did another book with Edna Gordon, who was a Seneca clan leader in New York. And what's really cool too about the clans up there, you normally think of like chiefs as being like the spokesman. Well, up there it's the women. So the women of each clan are the grandmothers. They're the ones that hold on to
the matriarchs.
Totally, and it's amazing. And I mean, I've spent many times with her, even in her late 80s. She was trying to keep me up because she'd stay up to 2-3 in the morning talking. She's like, let's just keep recording. I want to get my words and messages about my people, about what I believe. And, I can't tell you how many countless, nights that we've spent, chatting with her. And then we put together her book. She always wanted to have one that was officially published. She used to do like her own little notebooks and things, but we put that out. And so every time that we take, our initial investment, any profit that we made, we would put into the next book. And then after that, we did a reprint of White Buffalo Teachings, which is Chief Orville Looking Horse's book that, as I mentioned before, he's the 19th generation keeper of the sacred White Buffalo calf pipe. And, I'll talk about that in some future podcasts. That book alone probably has enough we can talk about. And we did a second printing of that. I was a part of the company that did the first printing. And, I think we did one of the first webcasts from Harvard. We went to all these colleges up in the Northeast, and Chief Orville Looking Horse would talk, as well as Dave Chief, who some may know. He was a spiritual leader, and he was one of the folks who organized the walk across the country that with all these tribal members and people kind of gathering masses, and they ended up walking all the way to the steps of DC and were very influential in enacting the Freedom of Religion Act, and being able to have a lot of the Native Americans practice their rituals and these things that have been a part of their culture since time began with them.
In comes the shamans and the medicine and the things that are very important.
It really is. And there was a lot of practices that ceremonies that they had that were illegal. And so being able to have that kind of the Freedom of Religion Act and things that Dave Chief and all these other folks were a part of was very impactful. And so he was speaking on that when we'd go on these book tours. And so we did those 3 books. We did a couple spoken word CDs. One's called My Life Is My Sundance, which is the Leonard Peltier story. It's a lot of audio that was read by Harvey Arden. And it was a really cool recording technique that they had. They were down with Reverend Goat, who is a musician, Reverend Goat Carson, down in New Orleans, and they had a group called the New Orleans Light.
I have to say that sounds totally like a New Orleans musician name, right?
I know it.
I mean, like peg the city with the name,
I know, and he definitely represented New Orleans. Like you could tell, like, where is he from? He's from there. It was fitting. But they did a recording where each musician would come in and play along to Harvey's audio recording of excerpts from the book of Prison Writings, the Leonard Peltier book, the first one. And they would all record to just Harvey, and the next musician would come in, and they wouldn't hear what the other musicians would play.
That's interesting.
So whenever the final mix came, like he would kind of, the engineer there would kind of mix in at different times, whatever those musicians are playing. Sometimes it's all of them. Sometimes it sounded just like this orchestrated chaos, and it was incredible. And it's a really cool idea. I really like that. And so we put out a second kind of a printing of that CD. The first one had kind of, I think there were a few you could probably get on eBay or something, but no one was producing them anymore. So we decided to do that and kind of bring it in the digital realm. And at the same time, there's another book called Noble Red Man, the story of Matthew King, Lakota Wisdom Keeper. And he had put together a book of his writings that Harvey published called Noble Red Man. And that was just incredible in its own. Well, he does the same thing where he's reading excerpts from the book as well as maybe some of his own thoughts and words. And some musicians came in and put together, not in the same format. They like kind of orchestrated the music. And so that was, just a phenomenal thing to kind of be a part of and help, print that out. And those, that was in 2011 that we put out those two and submitted them to the Native American Music Awards, which is called the NAMMYs. Mm-hmm. And there was, I think, between the two of those, there was 4 nominations for NAMMYs, and then there was one for Harvey Arden as well for the Native Heart Award for people who are not Native but have made significant contributions in the Native American world here. And by and large, we had great success with that. And we showed up took my wife Meg and took her out to the awards and was able to be there with Harvey. And we actually won for the My Life Is My Sundance for the best spoken word that year. So those are the kind of the main 5 projects we put out. We've been a part of a lot of other ones as well too. A lot of things I helped out Harvey with that other people maybe have published, but that was those were the big 5. But I have so much content, man.
It's great. Well, it's great to win an award or be part of something that's winning an award where the art is pure.
Totally.
And you're self-publishing, and no one's stepping on anything in terms of like the art or the content or any sequencing of information that you're putting out. Is the music that you've produced, is that self-produced as well, the Dead PA and that sort of web in your life? Was there any learning experience from either one in terms of self-production or self-publishing?
Yes, there's Dead PA. I think I'll have to kind of backtrack on the story just to kind of give a fun little intro. Jason Walsh was the main songwriter in Dead PA, right? He was the main writer. He was just, is a supremely talented musician. And before we were in Dead PA, we actually were in a band in high school. I was still in high school, called Backlash. And that started out with a couple of my other friends, Rob and Jesse and Jason. And
out of the Houston area.
Yeah, out of the Houston area. Yep, here in Houston, Texas. And they kind of played, and when I was 15 playing with my band Hollow Point, we would play a lot of shows all around the Houston clubs. And when my band fizzled and then eventually Backlash, they were done, Jason still wanted to keep it going. So he would bring in, another musician here to fill in as the bassist, the different guitarist. And then the drummer, I think, went off to college. And so he called me in to play with the band. And I don't even know, we might have done one show. We definitely practiced a lot. And then I took the bassist in that band and went and reformed Hollow Point with that and kind of took that away. And so it was a very brief time there. Well, Jason, as a result, was like, that's it. I'm tired of dealing with all these musicians that are not very reliable. And he decided to start kind of producing his own tracks under a group called Population Zero. And so he did like a lot of live PA, which is live programmable audio. You're recording a lot of things on, you know, your computer at home and your software, and then you're going to go ahead and recreate those songs live through synthesizers, samplers, live instrumentation. And whenever I got back from my time in Massachusetts, after I went to school in Northeastern University in Boston from 97 to 01, and then lived in Western Massachusetts for a little while after that, working with Harvey, and then came back, I think in like 2003, and I had an electronic drum kit, Roland V-drum kit, and I was just kind of jamming on my own. You know, it's like it's an electronic kit, so you can just wear headphones. So I just kind of play and hit these rubber pads and whatnot. And I reached out to Jason when I got back in. Hey, what are you doing music-wise? He kind of told me, he's like, oh, that's pretty cool. But what about you? You know, you playing drums? Like, well, you know, I got a drum set here, but I'm really kind of playing on the electronic drums a little bit more. He's like, wait, you got an electronic kit? Yeah. And he goes, hey, you want to bring that over sometime and jam? And so I think it was like January of 2003, we decided to start making some music together. And then we went under the name Dead PA, because we got booked on our very first show was opening up for Dita Von Teese, who's a famous model, and she had a burlesque show. And we were going to be an opening act kind of in one of the side rooms. And he just thought it'd be cool to have a flyer that said Dead PA, Live PA underneath it, you know? And it was kind of like this, with a lot of our kind of humor, is kind of a one-time joke. Well, we ended up playing our first set, and then Dita had requested for us to play right before her. She really liked our music. So then we moved all of our equipment to the main room and like played a set, and it went over really well, and we got some great press. Well, you know, it's kind of like, oh, now you're kind of stuck with that name, you know? So it's kind of like you think about like Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters. He's like, had I known we ended up being one of the biggest rock bands in the world, then, you know, might not have named it something like Foo Fighters, you know? It's like one of those things that we kind of looked at later on. It's like, well, it is what it is. We'll go with it. But when we were making music, for the most part, I'd bring in like some ideas musically, but Jason had a lot of songs already structured. So it was when we produced our first CD, it was all self-published. It was self-recorded in his home studio. And so, you know, I contributed to some drumming, MC work. I'd do a lot of like rapping. And so there's a few tracks on there. We did like a remix. Our buddy did one of our songs there too. And I have a song that I played on guitar and sang. And so we did that one on there and kind of made it electronic with, you know, some really cool beats and bass lines and whatnot. But it was all self-produced, and we reached out to some record labels, and, you know, kind of trying to shop our stuff. And Load Media, they were a big electronic publishing house, label outside of, they're in the United Kingdom, and they ended up putting out a 12-inch of ours. And, you know, aside from that, like, we would bring everything to the table, you know, so we weren't getting paid by some record company to come in and, you know, record an album, and we weren't going that route. It was completely
selling CDs out of the trunk.
Totally, man. Yeah. Or the Subaru Outback, as it was,
right?
The hatch. And, you know,
where did you go around the country? So our first out-of-state gig was supposed to be in New Orleans. I think it's the Palace Theater was the name of it. And, this crazy storm called Katrina came through, and it was literally the day before we were supposed to go and play our first out-of-state gig. And that was kind of a goal for me, is I always wanted to play. Yeah, I toured in other states. I don't care if it was just one, just to say I did one show out of state, you know. And I had done a lot of stuff in and around the, you know, Houston, Austin, Dallas area. And, you know, played when I was up in Boston and a bunch of different places and different bands there, Wrench and Tape Recorder 3 being the main two. But, you know, I'd never gone out of state. So that completely came crashing down. And I think the Palace Theater like flooded, I don't know, like 7 feet or something like that of water. So I can't remember where our first one was, but it might have been Baton Rouge. But we did play out in Louisiana. We started playing kind of regionally. You know, Arkansas, and then, you know, we'd travel up to Oklahoma, and then we'd kind of start branching out. And we got invited to play a show at the Winter Music Conference, which is
usually takes place in March. Huge music conference. It goes it's concurrent with the Ultra Music Fest that happens down there in Miami. And we like get there on our very first night. We go out to see someone perform. I forget, it was like called like the laundry room or something. And it was quite literally a laundry, like a laundromat. And then there was like a stage on the other end. And so this DJ is set up there and he's performing, and it's like probably 3 a.m, man. We got in so late that night. And so but in Miami and Miami Beach, it's like 24/7. There's always something going on, especially during this music conference. So we went there and, talking to this guy, and he's, sitting up next to us at the bar having a drink. And we handed him maybe a flyer to our show, and he's like, "Oh, what kind of music?" And we start telling him, it's kind of like live drum and bass, live drum and breaks music. We do a little bit of everything, but we're kind of a live instrumentation act. Like I play the electronic drums, and then, Jason's playing guitar and like the synthesizer, and, we're totally interacting with the crowd, and we dress up for different shows. If it was like a back to school special, we dress up as like, 70s teachers with our pocket protectors. And, if it was, a Star Wars theme, we dress up. Of course, Princess Leia, and I don't have the hair for that anymore, but, at one point in time. And, he'd be Boba Fett. And so we'd have all these songs that sample Star Wars. And so we're telling him about all this. And, he's like, "Man, this sounds really interesting. I totally want to check it out." And so he's like, "You guys should come over to this party that I'm throwing." I'm like, "Oh, okay, what's that, man?" And he hands us this flyer to, it's like with the invite, and he writes our name on it. And he's like, "Just hand this to the front." We're like, "Wait, this is like the Winter Music Conference, like grand opening party with all the musicians and all the speakers and like George Clinton and all these people that are like, we get there and we're standing next to him, like, oh my goodness." And like we find out that he is the grandfather of the Winter Music Conference. He's the guy who started it all. And we're like, what do you know? Just, right time, right place. Yeah, should we go out now? We're tired. Let's go anyway. And you just never know who you're going to meet, right?
Always the right move. I mean, you can never go wrong by saying yes in those moments, and then from there it sounds, just over the years of chatting, like it just sounds like you've met different musicians and people who will ultimately come on the podcast and kind of take that avenue in terms of a subject matter, just kind of thinking about where the podcast goes, that's another avenue that will be really interesting to hear about. Are there any musicians at that time in your life that were influential to the way that you guys played? Like, it's always fun to ask a musician who was your influences, like what?
Yeah, Jason's a few years older than me, so he had like that kind of 80s, Depeche Mode and like a lot of these influences that, later we'd actually cover some songs too, and kind of in our own style. But he had a little bit earlier of influences, but we shared a lot of like rock influences and, bands like Rage or like Nirvana, Soundgarden, it really would be all across the board, but that real raw live energy, we really wanted to bring that into our live shows. And so, when we would play, a lot of times it'd be like DJs and, maybe someone who has, a couple samplers or something out there, but then we would be jumping around on stage and like singing and then like doing the MC work, and I'm playing live drums, playing live guitar. We were kind of the oddball for a lot of the places that we'd play. And so at that time, you had like the Chemical Brothers, you had Prodigy, you had some of these groups that were
big break bands,
big time. And those guys had kind of led the forefront in that style of that kind of live instrumentation on stage. And, that mix of like rock and electronic, kind of before EDM had its own little stamp, electronic dance music. Those are these guys who were kind of creating that, the founders. And there's so many others to name, those are just a couple that I think people may have heard of from kind of commercial success. And so, those guys definitely played an influence because, we're also chasing those gigs, so like when we, meet with the guy that's running Winter Music Conference and, we get his kind of a check of approval, then, we get called back the next year to play, official sets at some of these, really, really cool events and
these
venues.
big block rockin' beats.
Totally. Right. And so we had like those kinds of influences, and we always wanted to get on those bills. We wanted to play the Ultra Music Festival. And then, another big group, Pendulum, who was out at the time. There was I remember there was a show in Dallas, and KJ Sawka is the drummer that was headlining the show that night. And he would play, he's a one-man band, right? So he's got his electronic drums and they're triggering samples, and he's got his laptop over there and he's like playing live stuff and multi-layering over those and like songs he'd written and then remixes. And if you haven't seen him play live, you just have to go look him up, KJ Sawka. But we end up meeting up with him, and he's like, yeah, I've got this really cool thing coming out. I can't tell you guys about it yet, but in like 2 weeks, you'll hear this announcement. We're like, oh man, who's he joining up with? What kind of group or whatever? Is this, like a super group? What's happening? And then find out that he's announced as the drummer for Pendulum, which, if anybody knows, Pendulum is one of the largest electronic like live bands. Like they're headlining all the festivals in Europe, the Glastonbury. You can imagine like Wembley Stadium, like they're selling these out. They are massive there. And they have a huge following here for folks who, that are into that kind of like EDM and rock style, because they're like the amazing meshing of those two, and their shows are just incredible. And so like, oh man, Kevin's going to be like the drummer. This is going to be insane. And, he jumps in and full force, and, go from watching these YouTube videos of him playing his own stuff, and now it's like, oh, you're playing in front of 300,000 people this weekend. What? And I reached out to him earlier this week and gave him an invite to come out here to the podcast, and he has agreed to. So we'll be doing an interview with KJ Sawka, and I am so looking forward to that. That guy is amazing. I mean, Pendulum, his own work, KJ Sawka, his own record label. I mean, he's done DJ work. He's been in the band Destroid, which is they're an amazing super group. And I'll definitely put some links into those videos. Oh man, they're just amazing. So I'm really excited to hear about like what he's doing musically now. What Pendulum shows or Destroid shows might be coming up, or what the next recording he's doing with his record label. That's going to be just phenomenal. And he's coaching folks and giving lessons too. I sat in with him, and, he's lending out his expertise and helping like train folks to really take the next step in music production or just playing, drums. But I 1 hour with him was just like, it took my vision to reality. And I just started like, okay, I needed someone to kind of help me figure out, because I want to get back into producing music again, man. I miss doing it. I've kind of hit the pause button, but I'm always like, you see me. I mean, I'm sorry in advance, but you know how it's like every single time you drive with me, I'm always beating on the steering wheel, playing drums, so it. But
I knew you were a real musician with the first time we showed up at one of the ranches, and your family walked upstairs, and basically it's the giant drum set and a bunch of instruments laying around. And typically at a ranch, you're outside all the time. So I was like, okay, well, in any downtime moment, somebody's banging on the drums up here.
Totally.
So,
yeah. Our daughters are like, jamming out, and they're beating the cymbals and just like having a blast. And like, it's a cool spot for that. But yeah, that was kind of a neat thing too. We ended up kind of redesigning this attic of this house to have it kind of be a jam session, so that when any of my friends who come in from, their respective towns, we can all sit down and be able to play music together, because we don't always get the chance to do that. I mean, we're full into dad life, right? Like we're busy with school and with, sports and activities, and, some of my friends that are musicians are in the same boat. And so sometimes I see them once every year, every other year. That's our chance for us to all get together and play, music, and the occasional shows we've done, some like weddings for some of our friends that, we've got another show we're going to be doing here pretty soon with the rock group Bad Sun, also known as Fump. And we got one of our bassists like in Colombia right now. So he's living there. So it's like when he comes back to visit his family in like Houston, we're going to be putting together a show and grabbing Mark Pendleton, the guitarist and vocalist, and he's out to Austin right now. But, countries and cities and sometimes states separate us. So it's neat to have like a little jam space like that. We can kind of just be like, all right, it's plugged in, let's go. We got an hour. But that's cool. I mean, and I know you're a huge fan of music. I mean, we share so many different.
Well, it's interesting. I'm not a musician,
right?
And I might be one of your few friends who's not a musician.
But
I do appreciate the. I mean, it's I think back to the indigenous thing too. Again, like just this web of commonality we have as peoples. We all can hear a beat, or like even a string, and just the sound of music, I think, speaks to our soul, is who we are, and I think that's one thing that I find very interesting about like having the studio out at a ranch setting, like out in the country and or in the woods, etc. There's like it's like a common. It's like the music speaks to the soul, but being out in the woods and in the trees and amongst the animals speaks to the soul, and so it's kind of it's a really interesting place to be, to get to these ranches, and I know that's something that's really, like something that really you're very fond of, like having that ability to sort of break away from society and be in those places.
Yeah, and it's that's one thing that Matthew and I totally share here. I mean, you and I, we were very kindred spirits from the first day we met. I mean, I think we were chatting for like 20 minutes, and we told our wives we're going to be best friends. And so, you've gotten to experience going to kind of both family ranches and seeing that, and it's just like such a recharge going out there and being able to kind of be immersed in nature. And, you and I are so observant, I was raised as a hunter. I know you kind of came in later on in your life as a hunter.
Raised as a fisherman though. So
yeah,
there's still a bit of.
Absolutely. There's so many cross influences and feelings that come from just being able to have that immersion into the outdoor world. And I was like born and raised with it. I'm fifth generation, Texan landowner. My family's ranch in South Texas, they were the first to settle that area when it was still, bandits going through and raiding, areas that are being developed. And, you got the Comanches over there. I mean, the history of itself is just incredible. And so walking around there and kind of like walking in the footsteps of your family, your ancestry, right? And then you step over an arrowhead and you pick that up, and it's like, oh, is this 5,000 years old? Is this 10,000 years old? Like that connection to that land, and like how many people have walked there before you. It just, as a young kid, that blew my mind, and it made me pay attention to everything around. Not because you might just find a cool arrowhead, because like you don't know what you'll see, like the different animals out there. It's it's kind of taken back in time, especially in kind of Southwest Texas, where it's like very desolate areas, kind of desert, dry land. It's like it's not really inhabited by a bunch of people. It's not like your Houston, which I was born and raised in. It's the fourth largest city in the U.S. I think it's supposed to be third soon or something, but it's massive, millions and millions of people, and then if I can duck out of that and just have the slow life of having a long weekend with my family out there at the ranch, growing up with that's something that I totally wanted to give that experience and opportunities to my kids, and my daughter's like, I'm like, let's go every chance we get. I want you to like totally be immersed in this kind of thing. And also helps you, I think, appreciate your time when you're not there, like it's like a reset. Every time I go to the ranch, and I know it's the same thing for you, right? Like we go there and it's like, a recharge, and you're like, okay, and go back to the city life and the 9 to 5, and
it's a recharge in different ways too. Like there's the get out of the city, the 9 to 5. I own a business, so it's that feels like a 24/7 endeavor all the time, and so like to get away and sort of being in this environment is it's definitely a recharge, but also stepping over the arrowhead that you were describing before, or watching a blade of grass blow in the wind, or seeing a deer or a bird or any animal sort of move about. There's a sense of timelessness out there that also you're not reminded of so much in the city and the hustle and bustle and the way time moves here. When you can see the repetition of the sun and everything that's happening out there, it's just sort of related to that life cycle. There's that connective tissue to something that we all experience, sort of just like the coming and goings of life. And it's just, it's a fascinating, it's not just fascinating. I'm humbled by it every time, you know, and it's one of those things in life where like the more you can immerse yourself in that, I think the more your soul's enriched by it.
I think that is entirely accurate in every way. Like it is. It's you definitely get humbled out there, and it's so cool being able to like wake up with the world, like as we get out there. And recently, like we went on like a spring turkey hunt out in Central Texas, and we were in, I guess about an hour before the first crack of light, and just hearing the sounds, and then seeing all the the animals start to move, and then what happens in wind direction, and like what animals you're hearing now, or we walk to this other place and do like a turkey call and see which ones are gobbling back to us. And during that particular trip, there was nothing put in the freezer and nothing put on the plate, but I can't tell you how much I learned about an area of my ranch that I really hadn't even explored that much, as far as like, I haven't done a lot of turkey hunting here. Oh, this is where they roost. Like we figured it out, we kind of had a game plan, but that was something that, just learning so much about that particular animal. Like, when do they call back? When do they not? Okay, it's like if there's other animals moving about, wonder if like they just went radio silent because it's like, bobcats in the area, or a coyote, or whatever it could be. Or human, right. And maybe it was us. They probably smelled me. And they're like, oh, we're not coming around that guy. Mm-mm. But
don't like him.
No, danger. But going out and seeing the world wake up is one of my favorite things. Going from complete silence, and then hearing the birds, right around that first crack of light, they're all just making all their sounds and calling, and then you start to see the animals moving. They might have been moving before, but until like you actually get light to see through your binoculars, or with your naked eye, you don't know that they're even there, right? I mean, now we have a technology like, we have these crazy, the scopes and things you can see at nighttime, like thermal imaging, and that's just amazing. And, that's something we've been able to look through those and see, like, oh man, there's some hogs. All right, game on, and so like that is, you're catching a world that they're doing that same thing. Those cycles of moving, and then, it's getting hot in the day. They're laying down
100 years ago, 200 years ago, yes, 300,000. Yes. I mean, it's that's what I love seeing. It's just like knowing that is going to happen no matter what.
Yeah.
And the other interesting observation about like our time there, this past time, this is April 2022. And we were there also about 3 weeks ahead, or before the trip we're describing, and summer just settled in that 3 week period, and like the wildflowers completely changed. The grass was much taller. The turkeys weren't acting the same way that they were before, and just sort of that little shift in the weather, and like the temperature I think went up by 10 degrees on average 3 weeks later, just the way the Texas weather patterns were working. It's just neat to like also see it on a microcosm too, like that little shift within a month and know that like every year there's always these little shifts that are taking place, you know, and like the fawns are probably starting to kind of come to, and you know, like every animal, every creature is getting ready for the deep summer, and you know, and next thing you know, it'll be back to fall and hunting license and the rituals that play out, you know, on these ranches across Texas, you know.
Yeah. And across the country. Right?
Across the country.
Yeah, but I mean, like what we know is because we're mainly hunting Texas here,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, everyone's going through their own rituals of time. You know, it's like the 4 seasons, right? Of like, you know, deer, turkey, dove, duck. No, but like we being able to be there in that, you know, 3-week difference, like, man, it was night and day difference in how some of the animals were responding, or in our case, not responding. And I'm really excited because I felt like we had the most successful turkey season then. It's like we have 1 month, and we went out there April 7th because Matthew and I share the same birthday, April 6th. We're a few years apart, but we're birthday twins.
I had the luxury of turning 40 this year.
That's right. So what did you do to celebrate your 40th? What's one of the first things you did when you turned 40?
All I know is I turned 40, and then the next day I was 40 and a turkey old. So basically, just shot my first turkey the day after April 6th on April 7th, and a great experience. You know, just with George and another buddy, Jacob Spradling,
Yep.
and we just ascended onto this field. They were there. We parked the Polaris. George is going to write a piece for Texas
Trophy Hunter.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
We'll see.
Yeah,
we're working on a piece.
Submit it to a few people.
Anyway, but as the story lays out, I had to make an ambush on foot, and they didn't really get to see what happened, but they just heard because they were trying to lay back and not be so loud and all that stuff. But it was a really neat experience to work, you know, kind of cut through the woods and you know, put the sights on the turkey, and you know, I've never had that experience, and super grateful that George could put me in that position, and just grateful for all the opportunities, you know, being out in the wilderness, if you will, on the, you know, again, on these ranches. So I think it's really neat that you have that in your family. Our family, we have an interest in a place in Colorado, and the fact that you guys can go often and see it each month and put your hands on it, it's a different experience than what we have. And so sometimes I'm like, man, that's I would just want to be out there all the time. I know you feel that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you could, if you could kind of get out there every weekend, I think you'd be 100% your way, pretty much. Like you'd be that's George. That's like George living his best life right there.
Right. No, I love it. And what's so neat too is having like the different degrees of experience. You know, growing up and then hunting with like my uncle, and then with, you know, my friends that were my high school buddies, and getting them into hunting, and then kind of, you know, friends, but now being able to bring my family into it, you know. And so I totally love being able to bring, you know, Meg and our daughters out there and have them experience it. And it's, you know, it's kind of the passing of time, right? Like when I was going to the ranch in Central Texas, when I was a kid, it was my granddad would take us out there, right? And so most of the time you'd be on your own with your granddad. Sometimes the other cousins would be there, but, you know, he'd take us out to the ranch, open up the front gate, close it, and then he'd let me drive the car. So, you know, he'd kind of sit in the front seat with them, and he'd work the pedals and, like, you know, drive. And so that's how, like, all of, like, my cousins, we all learned how to drive doing that. And so just like that little experience, you know, that's what like the ranch offered. And then you'd go out and you'd be on the tractor with him, and then, you know, going out and feeding hay to all the cattle. He ran cattle out there, Santa Gertrudis cattle, kind of originated from the King Ranch here in Texas, a famous ranch here. And, man, like, then we'd go fishing in the afternoon, you know, and we'd be catching catfish and bass and perch and, you know, learning how to fish. And so this place provided, and learning how to shoot guns as well too. I did that with my uncle at the Southwest Texas ranch there. He kind of taught me gun safety, but then I go with my granddad and my other uncles at the Central Texas ranch, and we're shooting targets there too. So like that gave me such respect for hunting, for firearms, for land ownership, land management, wildlife management, and all these things that I didn't even realize how deep as a kid those were going to be connectors in my life as I grew up as an adult. And now I'm looking at it like, yeah, we got this pond, Jacob helped me to stock the pond with a bunch of fish. And now it's like, here we are, I don't know, I think it's like 6 or 7 years after we stocked this one pond, we're catching dinner. Ellie's out there and she's, catching a bass for dinner. I mean, I your daughter did as well too. And, both of my kiddos have, and, my wife, and we're having this experience where, she didn't know how to fish before, my youngest, and my oldest that had fished a couple other places, but really like they're learning. And at the ranch that I learned at, different pond, mind you, and a different time and a different teacher, but like now I get to play that role of teaching them or what I've been taught. And that's kind of like the whole, going back to that Native American, Indians and indigenous elders, working with them. It's like, I always kind of took the cue from Harvey, and, you're kind of a conduit of the messages. You're not this person that, especially a lot of these places that, people want to go in there. I want to tell their story. I'm going to write the story. It's like, no, you let them tell their story, and you just capture it and you share it, and that's what I'd love to do with, this idea, this podcast is like, I'm not trying to build this, huge thing. Oh, this is the George Blitch show every single time. No, man, this is, I'm hosting it. I'm letting you hear about, this person, that person, their interesting lives. 'Cause I always felt like, the more things you can share out in the world, and it kind of goes back to like teaching the kiddo. It's like, yeah, man, I learned from my granddad how to tie a hook, like, all right, now I'm going to show that to my kid. And then hopefully her children, grandchildren learn from her, or maybe I'll be able to teach my grandchildren there, just like my granddaddy taught me. But these passages of traditions and of history and time and ancestry, all that just resonates to me. And it kind of like in every aspect, it feels like that's like part of the web, we were talking about. That's something about that preservation of whatever it is, man, someone's talent, their music, or, someone who's an author and sharing what books they've put out. One of my buddies is like the head of like, he's like kind of the one-stop shop for everything eSports, a Dr. David Hedlund up in New York at St. John's. He's a professor there. And like being able to share all the things as he learned, because a lot of people, eSports is something new, right? Let's let him on here and kind of give everyone a lesson. He's the person who knows the most about that. And so I'd want to find those people who have, their specialized interests and mastery of skill, and being able to kind of share their stories. I get so much joy out of being a part of that, being a conduit, So I'm so excited about where this could come. It's starting here. We're sitting on a living room table, with a couple microphones and a laptop, and I'm excited to see where this can go. Who can we go and travel and interview together, right? It's
like it truly feels like it's going to be a web. Like it's going to catch a lot of subjects, and it's going to catch a lot of different people saying a lot of really cool things.
Yeah, man, I'm so excited. It's every day I'm checking my email and getting other people that are like, yeah, I want to be a part of it. Leonard Peltier's attorney, Kevin Sharp, he's going to be on here pretty soon. We're going to do an interview and probably launch that on June 26th. It's the anniversary of the shootout on Pine Ridge Reservation, and man, he's got a lot to share. And I can't wait to let people know about what's been going on with Leonard and his case and his fight for freedom, and he's still in prison, and, all the things that's been going on there. And we're, all fighting real hard to try to make sure that we can, see him and back with his family so he can teach his grandchildren, some of the things he's learned in his life, and continue that on. So It's exciting, man. This is great. I'm really happy and grateful that you're able to come here today, and we can kind of.
Well, son of a Blitch.
All right, that's me. Well,
son of a Blitch. What a good time. I enjoyed it.
Thanks, man.
You.
I really did too. So, you'll hear from Matthew Mitchell again soon. You can look up some of the amazing stuff he does at Matthew Mitchell Architecture. Why don't you tell people where they can find you?
MatthewMitchellArchitecture.com. Architect by day, and just everything else you heard here by evening. Our Instagram is also Matthew Mitchell Architecture. So thank you, George. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, man. My pleasure. We'll talk soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye.